Howdy, it's Kyle with part 3 of the Examining Interesting Map series, where we're taking a look at some really cool depictions of geography of the US and the world. And that's what a map is. It's a visual depiction of geography. And many of the maps authors are credited, many others are fair use and Creative Commons, and some other ones are the ones I made myself. But either way, let's take a look at some really interesting maps. This first map takes a look at broods of cicadas and when they emerge, and 2021 is going to be a pretty big year for cicadas, so the areas that are yellow are going to see a large number of these things flying around. So for 2021, the areas highlighted in yellow, such as most of Indiana, western and southwestern Ohio, parts of south central Pennsylvania, and portions of the Appalachians, are going to see a big brood emerging. And these things are loud and they go all night long. It's crazy. So I do a lot of camping in the summertime, and I mean, it can be hard to sleep at night when these things are just screaming all night. It's pretty crazy. And down where I live, there's a lot of caves and a lot of bats. So the years that the broods emerge and they're large broods, the bats are just flying around just fat and happy because these cicadas are really slow and easy to get to. So the bats love cicadas, but we don't. This map shows the most commonly spoken language in a state that is not English or Spanish. For Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Louisiana, French is actually the second most spoken language in the state ahead of Spanish. And in Alaska, the indigenous language Yupik is the second most spoken language in the state. For the plurality of states, German is the third most spoken language, but there really aren't that many German speakers in those states. It's not like you're going to go to an Applebee's in Montana and hear a bunch of people speaking German, but for all those states in that kind of a pinkish color, German is the third most spoken language. In California, Nevada, and Hawaii, the third most spoken language is Tagalog, which is a language native to the Philippines. And along with Alaska, Arizona, New Mexico, and South Dakota are the states where the third most spoken language is indigenous. In states like Texas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Washington, and Minnesota, it's indicative of refugees coming over from Vietnam during and after the Vietnam War. So overall, this is a pretty interesting map to show where immigrants from different parts of the world have gone to different parts of the U.S. In a related map, this one shows what Hispanic group other than Mexican is the largest in each state. So no surprise that for most of the country it's going to be Puerto Rican, being that Puerto Rico is part of the U.S. But you also have quite a few Salvadoran immigrants in California, Nevada, and Texas specifically, but also Arkansas, Virginia, and Maryland. It's kind of hard to tell, but Rhode Island is the only state in the country where Dominican is the largest Hispanic group after Mexican. So this is an important map because you'll often hear the term Hispanic as if it's one giant group, but there are a lot of different nationalities and ethnic groups that make up the term Hispanic. And similarly, this is a map that shows the largest Asian group in each state. And just like Hispanic, the term Asian covers a lot of different groups of people from many different countries, and it generally only refers to East and Southeast Asia, but this map also does include India. Western Asia is mostly Arabs and other white folks, so that's not counted as a separate racial group. So it's interesting to note that Korean and Japanese are the only two Asian groups that have a large number of people in the US, but are not the largest group in any state. So the last of the ethnic maps I'm going to show is a map of Europe that shows which US state has the largest percentage of the population from that country. So for example, Russia is the largest country depicted on this map. It's the big purple one at the east end, and New York is the state with the largest percentage of the population that is Russian. So for the most part, it's what you would expect. The Scandinavian and Nordic countries are North Dakota and Minnesota, Irish in Massachusetts, Portuguese in Rhode Island, Italians in Rhode Island. So nothing too surprising. I think Utah for Denmark is a little surprising, but for the most part, it's basically what you would expect. And here's a piece of trivia for you. A lot of folks from Luxembourg immigrated to Iowa. So it's interesting to see how immigrants from Europe, how they chose to go to certain places, and while a country right next to it might have gone to a totally different state. This map is the result of a survey in which people were asked, what other country do you view most favorably? So for example, in the US, you'll see a Canadian flag, and that means Canada was the number one choice for when Americans were asked, what country do you view most favorably? However, Canada did not return the favor. So there are some pretty interesting relationships here, like Germany and France are now apparently best friends. Most of Southern Africa views South Africa the best, but South Africa itself views Namibia the best. Australia and New Zealand are buddies. Argentina and Uruguay are buddies. Mexico is asking for a different neighbor to the north. And for Americans, well, we got Colombia, the Philippines, and South Korea. That's our crew. This is a map of the United Kingdom that shows the favorability of the monarchy. There's no legend with this map, but the areas that are pink and purple have a negative view of the monarchy, and areas that are green have a positive view of it. So it's really easy to pick out the border between England and Scotland, with all of Scotland viewing the monarchy negatively and the areas just south of that in England viewing it favorably. In the west central portion of the country is Wales, which also views the monarchy negatively. In the southeastern portion of England, you can see some purple cluster there. It's kind of hard to see, but that's London and the suburbs. And the other pink dots throughout most of central England are the other major cities, kind of industrial cities like Liverpool, Leeds, and Manchester. So it appears as though people in rural, more conservative England support the monarchy, but everybody else in the UK doesn't. And this also shows a pretty good correlation with who supported Brexit and who didn't, with Scotland, Wales, and the big cities of England being against it, but the smaller rural parts of England were for Brexit. And this map clearly shows why there's a renewed movement in Scotland to break free from the UK and be its own independent country. This is a pretty sad map for Americans, I think. It shows the minimum mandatory paid vacation days by country. So this shows that the vast majority of countries in the world, full-time workers get mandatory paid vacation, with the one huge exception being the US. And not only are there many, many Americans that get no vacation time at all, many of the ones that do don't use it. I've never really understood why so many Americans are proud to not use their vacation days as if it's a badge of honor. So if you're an American that is fortunate enough to actually get vacation days, use them. Even if you don't actually go anywhere, just sleep in every day for a week. It'll be good for you. This map shows life expectancy throughout the US and Canada. And there's a pretty strong correlation between poverty and low life expectancy, which is probably to be expected, with the states that are colored in red and purple being the ones with the lowest life expectancy. And the same is true for Canada as well. Canada overall has a higher life expectancy than the US, but the portions of Arctic Canada tend to have the lowest life expectancy, with Nunavut at only 71 years. So you might notice a pretty stark shift from Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana into Texas. And the reason for that is the portions of Texas along the Mexican border is the part of the state that has the longest life expectancy. So that's the part of the state that's bringing up the total number, even though the rest of Texas would be pretty much like Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana. In a related map, this takes a look at the places in the world that have the largest number of people that live to be over 100. So you'll see a pretty good cluster right around the Mediterranean, with Spain, France, and Italy all being represented on this map. And this part of the world has some of the best climate on Earth, kind of like the California coast. And I've said this in a bunch of videos. The physical geography, the climate of your region has a huge effect on your health. People in California are healthier and less obese and they live longer. That's the same way you get in the Mediterranean, where you have wealthy countries with a nice climate. People are going to live longer. And it's also interesting to note that Japan is pretty well known for having a lot of people that live to be over 100, and I believe it has the longest life expectancy of any country on Earth. And look at the U.S., Hawaii is a state with the longest life expectancy, and Hawaii also has a large percentage of the population that is of Japanese descent. And speaking of Hawaii, this is a map that shows the Hawaiian island chain. The part that's blown up in the southeastern are the islands that stick out above the water, and this is what we know as the state of Hawaii. But the rest of the chain is huge. It goes on for a very long way, and the vast majority of these are mountains that are under the surface of water, so you don't see them, but they are large mountains under the sea. This map shows the state of marijuana legalization in the US as of April 2021. So the week before I posted this video, both New York and New Mexico legalized marijuana, which makes it 16 states plus DC that have it legalized. The states highlighted in dark green are states where it's legal and it's regulated kind of like alcohol. The states that are light green are where it's illegal, but you won't get arrested for it. You'll get a ticket. So it'll be kind of like a speeding ticket or a noise ordinance or an open container. I forgot the color in Delaware, but Delaware would be light green. The states colored in peach or orange or whatever you would call that are ones where it's illegal, but you'll probably just do maybe a few days in jail and have a relatively small fine, but not go to prison. And the states highlighted in red are the ones where even with a small amount of marijuana, you're going to prison and you're going to pay a huge fine. And of course, this is just how it is on the books. I'm not sure how it works in practice if you're going to actually go to prison for having a small amount of marijuana in Texas or wherever, but this is what is actually on the books. But it's worth noting that with New Mexico and New York joining the ranks of legal states, there are now more states where marijuana is legal than states where you're going to go to prison for having a small amount. And by the end of 2021, both Virginia and Hawaii will probably be dark green. This is a map that shows the results of a study that was completed in March 2021. It takes a look at the median house value for new construction only and compares that to the wages of the state. So as you can see, for pretty much throughout the entire country, fewer than half of the people can afford a new home. Now again, these are only for brand new homes. This is not the overall median house value of the state. And so some of these numbers in some of these eastern and southeastern states might look kind of high, but they're pretty much right on, because where we live in Chattanooga, new houses, new construction are going for upper 200s, well into the 300s, and Nashville is even more expensive. So this map shows just how ridiculously expensive housing has gotten across the entire U.S. over the past few years. And people always talk about California and New York, but it's happening throughout the entire country. I'm certainly no housing expert. I'm not going to pretend to be one, but as a casual observer, I'm kind of worried we're headed for another housing bubble burst like we had in like 07 and 08. I can't see how these prices are going to be sustainable. And speaking of expensive real estate, here's a map of Atlantic City, New Jersey that shows the streets from the Monopoly board game overlaid on it. I think a pretty good chunk of people are familiar with Monopoly, and the color of the streets on the map correspond to the colors on the board game itself. I think the game was like 100 years old, so I'm pretty sure the real estate stuff has changed, and Atlantic City is for the most part kind of a rough city, but it is kind of cool to see the Monopoly street names and depicted on an actual map of Atlantic City. And this is the last map I'm going to show. It is a truly gorgeous map, a wonderful piece of cartography. I love this thing. I'd love to get this thing blown up and have on my wall. And so this is obviously a relief map of the contiguous U.S. and shows some pretty cool geology on here. So I've mentioned this in a bunch of videos, and there's a huge difference between the east and the western U.S., and this map shows it very clearly. The Appalachian Mountain Range in the eastern U.S. is also very visible. Visible, but not quite as easy to see, is the Ozark Plateau of southwestern Missouri, northwestern Arkansas, and southeastern Oklahoma. And you can also see just how flat the Gulf Coast is, and especially Florida. But also a very interesting, obvious feature is where I'm from, the Central Valley of California. It's a giant flat valley surrounded by mountains, and it's really obvious to see on a map like this. So this is just a really wonderful map that highlights the variations of geology throughout the contiguous U.S. So there you have it, part 3 of examining interesting maps. And I love doing these videos because looking at maps like this is basically what I do for half of my free time anyway. So it's a lot of fun looking at these, and I hope you enjoy looking at these maps too. And if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up to let me know you approve, and subscribe to this channel if you're interested in learning more about U.S. geography. I'm talking about the U.S. mostly, but also Canada, Mexico, the Caribbean, and talking about comparing and contrasting cities and counties and states and all kinds of different categories, cross-country road tripping, and pretty much everything I talk about comes from a little more nerdy type perspective. But yeah, thanks for watching. Geography King, signing out.